Oh, here comes somebody. Always got to wait for that first one. I don't know how, it doesn't tell you how many's on, but that lets me know at least somebody is on. So we'll go ahead and get started. First things are of course, our prayer list. And Dylan Price, the 16-year-old great grandson of Alberta Butler, is doing better. His blood counts are up. They're going to be able to take him off of the steroids. They've got to start weaning him off, and so hopefully, as they do that, his numbers stay up. That's what's going to be the determining factor. Carol Milligan has a member of her family, Robert, that's found out that they've got some pretty serious cancer and dealing with that. So remember them. And then Danny Price had been doing pretty good. He had a pretty rough night last night. I hadn't heard anything this morning till after we had church, and his ammonia levels were way up, and there was a lot of confusion and some other issues, but looks like they're getting that under control now, so he seems to be doing better. And then Georgiana Bettis and Amber Shaw and all the rest that we need to pray for. And so, anybody else? Nope. All right, well, let's go ahead and bow our heads. Father, we thank you for this beautiful day you've given to us, for this place we have to gather in, for all that are with us on this night, for your word that we can have, possess, Lord, profess, read, and teach and learn, and all these things because of the nation that we live in. And Lord, we ask that you continue to bless our country and our congregation, that we will remain strong and serving you for as long as it takes until Christ comes back to call us all home. Lord, we pray for these people that we mentioned on this evening, that you will touch them and intervene in their lives, Lord, that they just know that you are there to get them through whatever is happening, that you are there for them to lean on, and that you're there to carry them if that need comes up to you. Lord, we just ask your blessing on all of us that are gathered together, on our church, Lord, and all that we do. And all this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. We are in Genesis, of course, and we ended up with 46:27 last time. So what was there? Where we ended up was that Joseph had revealed himself to his brothers. He sent them home to get Dad and the rest of the family and come back. Pharaoh had given his blessing for them and actually sent carts with them so that they could transport Jacob, who was we're going to see was 130, and all the rest of the family down to the little kids, and that there were 70 in all that were coming to Egypt. There were more than that because you got 4 in Egypt with Joseph, his wife, and his 2 sons. So the 70 of them are on the way, and that's where we kind of left off. And so we're going to pick up now with verse 28 of chapter 46. Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father, and he wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were living in the land of Canaan have come to me. These men are shepherds. They tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, 'What's your occupation?' you should answer, 'Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did.' Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all the shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." So, we talked last time, we've talked about the status of the different sons and all that. So, why did Israel, Jacob, whatever you want to call him, why did he send Judah to meet Joseph?
Next one in line that
He's the next one. That's right. Judah is the leader. As we talked about in all the confrontations with Joseph, Judah had stepped up and become the leader of the family. Reuben had been, but he defiled his father's bed. He slept with his stepmother, basically, and his father's concubine, and that ruined that. Simeon and Levi were number 3 and 4, and over what they did with Shechem after the abduction of Dinah and all that, they kind of got left out. So that next one was Judah. Judah seems to have stepped up to the task pretty well. He was the main one on the test with the, what's your moral situation now that Joseph kind of put them through. And Judah had been the one that did most of the communicating with Joseph. So that was another reason. They seemed to have redeveloped a relationship or were communicating with each other and kind of speaking through one another. So off he goes. And what did he do? What was his purpose?
Find the way to Goshen.
Find the way to Goshen. I knew I had him. Now, Goshen's a very special area in Egypt because what's going on in Egypt? Been going on for 2 years. Famine, drought, no rain. Said that it was so dry they couldn't even plant crops, let alone not getting anything from what is grown. But when there was one area that always stayed fertile. It's probably what, besides storing up the grain, kept them going. And I got a couple pictures here. This kind of shows Egypt, what Egypt looks like even to today. And of course, there's the Red Sea that they were going to cross, and Jacob would have been coming in from this area, but he doesn't know which area to go to. And it's kind of got some of the oases and the different places along the river. But this is the one that really shows you why they needed to go to Goshen, because if you can see that, see everything's brown except for what? This one little area up here where the Nile comes, and the Nile splits out into what they call a delta, but which because it kind of looks like a triangle. But it is marshy. It is there. It's one of the most fertile areas in the world, and you can kind of see where the Nile River runs. That's not so much the Nile on this one. It's green all the way down because things grow along the river, and so with that all. This is where Joseph's telling them to go. He's not saying come down in here. And actually, at that point in time, the capital was kind of down in this area. But Joseph is saying, go up here. He knows the land. The first thing he did when he took over was it said that he traveled the whole land of Egypt to see what he was dealing with. So that kind of helps you understand. Hold that up there where you guys can see a little bit. See it? You can see the green up here. And that's where they would have been, and that's where Joseph wants them to go, and that is, quote, what Pharaoh called the best of the land. And that is so fertile that one little area there fed the whole Roman, all of what we call today Italy, everything around Rome. They had grain ships that came in. Alexandria is about right there. And so they would have grain ships that would come from Egypt on a regular basis. Of course, they just go due north from Egypt to Italy and Rome, and that's what fed the Romans, was that little area there. So they don't know where Goshen is. If I hadn't shown you that picture and I said, all right, I want you to go to Egypt, go to Goshen, you know what you'd do? Google it. Where's Goshen? Guess what I did? I knew where Goshen was, but I had to look up the maps. So, that was the whole point. They didn't know where Goshen was. They didn't know, do we need to go down to the south? Do we need to go north? Where in Egypt do we need to go? So they arrived in the region of Goshen. They're not necessarily in their area yet or where they're going to settle down. And as soon as they get to Goshen, they're kind of in the territory. What's Joseph do? He has them get out. What you got to understand what it's saying in the old language is basically he said, get my limo ready. And, so it talks about his chariot. Do you think he was driving the chariot? No. You think this is one of those war chariots where one guy's driving, the other guy's got a bow and arrow? No. This was the big black SUV limo with and all that kind of stuff. Joseph sitting back there kind of taking it easy. And so he goes to Goshen. Why does he go to Goshen? To meet his father. He didn't go there to see anybody else, which makes perfect sense, right? He hasn't seen him in a long time, about 22 years. And so he is on his way to see him. And as soon as Joseph got to his father, what happened? Threw his arms around him and wept for a long time. That's one of the things about Joseph. He was a pretty emotional guy. I think it's 5 or 6 times it talks about him weeping. But of course, these would have been tears of joy, and I think a lot of people would have been in that same situation especially from Jacob's standpoint too. Joseph didn't know if he would ever see his father again. Figured that he wouldn't. Didn't even know if he was alive when the story all started. And here he is. They're reunited, and if you remember, they were pretty close. He was the favored son. The other 10 above him, they're out working in the fields and taking care of it, and he's sitting at home with Dad, taking it easy and going and checking on him and all that kind of stuff. He had the coat of many colors, and so he had a special coat that his dad had given him, and all that. So they had a special relationship. And so what's his dad say?
Ready to die.
I can die in peace. You ever heard anybody say that? When they've had the bad things happen in their lives, and they finally get to that point of stuff they've struggled with, and things turn out, and that's what he's saying. He's not saying kill me now. He's basically saying I'm ready. The one thing that happened to me that was the worst in all my life has been rectified. So I've seen for myself, and it's a whole lot different. If he'd have stayed back in Canaan, and his sons would have kept telling him, well, yeah, he's alive. We saw him. That's one thing. But to put your arms around him, to touch him, all that kind of stuff, that's a whole different thing. So now, Joseph is the man with the plan, right? We read about it all. That's how he got to where he was. He had a plan for Egypt. He had a plan to test his brothers. Joseph is the man with the plan. And now his family's about to go meet Pharaoh, and what does he do?
He tells them what to say.
He has a plan, yeah. He tells them what to do. And he says, this is how you need to, now, nobody's ever done that, right? I know this guy, or I know this gal. When you go talk to them, this is what you need to say, or this is how you need to say it. And all those kind of things, especially, in some businesses, if somebody's not dealt with those sort of things before, or some families and all that, saying, don't just go busting in there and don't say something stupid. He's guiding them on what to say, because he knows Pharaoh. He's been working for Pharaoh for quite a while, and about 7 years now. And so he knows if he didn't know Pharaoh, and he didn't know how to handle Pharaoh, he wouldn't have been in that job for 7 years. So he's first, he says what?
That he's going to go talk to Pharaoh first, and then
I'm going to go talk to Pharaoh first. I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to get it all built up so that he's ready when you get there. And this is what I'm going to tell him, so that they know what's being said. And what's he going to tell him?
that they're shepherds and they brought all their livestock
Yeah.
and everything.
My brothers have come to me. That's the first thing. They didn't just, this isn't just a clan of people that arrived. My brothers have come to me. And so, he's got that special reputation with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh thinks a lot about him, as we've seen. And Pharaoh said, go and get him, have him come. And it wasn't that they came here for the food, right? They came to me. That we are getting together to reunite. Oh, and by the way, they're shepherds, and they have their flocks and things with them. And So, and everything they own. But now Pharaoh told them what?
Just to come.
Just to come. Leave your flocks behind, leave what you own behind and come. Well, they didn't quite do that. And so he knows then that once he tells Pharaoh that they're here, that Pharaoh's going to call them in. Now, Pharaoh didn't call everybody in that comes, but this is Joseph's family. He wants to meet Joseph's family. And so he knows he's going to call them in, and he says, one of the things he's going to ask you is what?
What's your occupation?
What's your occupation? What do you do for a living? Why do you think he would ask him that? It's a couple of different things. One of them is, well, we're going to see here in a little bit, that there were certain professions, certain things that just didn't quite mix with the Egyptians. The Egyptians did have that elitist type attitude. Remember, they wouldn't eat with the Hebrews, and even Joseph's brothers didn't catch on that that he wasn't eating with the Egyptians. You know, when they had the banquet, they had the Egyptians in one spot, Joseph in another, the brothers in another. And they didn't eat together because they didn't like those. And then also, they thought that shepherds were detestable. Now, there's a couple of theories. I want to make sure you understand their theories about that. And one of them had to do with just kind of that the Egyptians thought, you know, that we're too good to treat animals. Now, or to take care of animals. And the Jews were that way to a certain extent. Jews looked down on shepherds because the Jews, they broke the Sabbath. They had to work every day. You couldn't do no work on the Sabbath. You had sheep, and you had to tend to them. You had to protect them. You had to guide them. You had to do all those things. So they looked down on shepherds, and the Egyptians kind of did too. You know, this is just, it's not a respectable living, so to speak. Now, the second theory about all that theory is that it had to do with the Egyptians did worship some animals. You know, there was the jackal, the hawk or falcon, the cat, and the snake were their four big gods besides the sun god. But there were other smaller ones, and some of those one of them were other animals, including sheep and cows and those sort of things. So there are some beliefs that they were kind of like the Hindus. You don't kill. And there are, although there's not a whole lot of proof to it, but just looking at some of the religious beliefs, there are some scholars that think that they were vegetarians, and like the Hindus and all that. But there's really nothing that leads itself to that. But if we were to jump ahead to the Exodus story with Moses, and he's telling Pharaoh, you know, we need to go worship our God, and he says, do it here. And he said, it would upset you if we did our sacrifices in Egypt, for that is detestable to them. So 400 years later, that part is still there, and that's what it seems to be as much as anything. The whole idea of sacrificing sheep and doing that and having them for that reason and for killing them and all that was detestable to the shepherds. So they stick them as far away or to the Egyptians, they stick the shepherds as far away as possible. So Joseph says, make sure you tell him that you are shepherds. Now, doesn't that sound like a contradiction, though? You know, Joseph's family's coming. He wants the best for them, and he says, but make sure you tell them you're doing something that's detestable to them.
But he wants them to go
So,
to Goshen.
yeah, Joseph has a plan. The plan is to get them to Goshen. That's far away from Pharaoh and all of that, and all the main Egyptians. Remember, I told you that the main capital was down farther on the Nile at that time, and Joseph's got it. He's got it all worked out, and usually what Joseph works out. So and that we're not just shepherds. It's not just that we decided to be shepherds. What's he say?
Just as their fathers.
So is our father. Basically, our whole family for generations have been shepherds. So that's who we are. That's all we know, and all that sort of thing. And then it says, he says, then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen. You know, if you're not shepherds, he may want you to stay down here or something. So that's the whole point, is to get them to the best of Egypt. And so chapter 47, so Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and brothers with their flocks and herds and everything they own have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? Your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, just as our fathers were. They also said to him, we have come to live here a while, because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now please let your servants settle in Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any of them among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. So Joseph works the plan, right? And the plan worked. It takes them in. They said pretty well, word for word, what Joseph said. Now, how many of them went? 5. And how many of them were there? 11, counting Benjamin.
Benjamin.
So which 5 he took, I don't know. But they said just exactly what Joseph told them to say, and Pharaoh reacted just exactly how Joseph knew he would react. Except he throws a little thing at the end. You know, he says, they've come to you. He understands that's what Joseph told them. That's what they've said. That's how Pharaoh understands. They didn't just come to Egypt. They came to Joseph to be with their brother. And so, let your father and your brother settle in the best of the land, which is Goshen. And what's the little thing he throws on the end?
That they can take care of if anyone's really good.
Yeah, if any of them are really good, put them in charge of my livestock. So why would he say that? I mean, he's had really good luck with Joseph, right? You know, if any of your brothers are like you, I want them. Put them in charge of my livestock. And their status goes along with that too. Now, it never says whether he did or he didn't, but or he may not have thought that any of them had any special ability. I don't know, but because it never really addresses that part again. So then, verse 7. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him before Pharaoh. After Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult. They do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt, gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all of his father's household with food according to the number of their children. So the sons are done, the sons are gone, and now it's a special time because Joseph brings in who? His dad. And you know, with the relationship with that Joseph would have had with Pharaoh and with his dad, you know, he would. It makes it. That's another one of those things to me. Just seems pretty natural. You know, people are people. You would have brought your dad in, the most important person in your life at this point, and introduced him to Pharaoh, to the king, and said, "This is the one that it's all about." And he is presented, so he doesn't just come walking in. This would have been a president. No, there wouldn't have been trumpets blowing and all that kind of stuff like in the old movies, but Joseph would have brought him in and presented to him. What's the first thing Jacob does? Blesses Pharaoh. So what do you think about that? I mean,
Playing the game.
do what, John?
I thought it might be a little risky because you've got differences of religion.
Well, it doesn't say that who he blessed him in the name of,
Oh, well.
because they would have worshipped. They called it ON, Isis, and all the others that we talked about. But
Sucking up to him.
yeah, that's exactly what Marty said. Sucking up to him. He is starting it off. I mean, if somebody comes, it's not like somebody sneezes and they say, God bless you. But if you're meeting someone for the very first time and the very first thing they say is that they bless you. And back then, people put a whole lot more stock, whether it was the Hebrews or the Egyptians or who it was, in that sort of thing. Now there's a lot of people today, that don't really take it, I don't know if it's the right word, they don't take it serious, or they don't understand the gravity of it, or they don't put the emphasis with it. back then, if somebody said, "The Lord bless you and keep you and make His face to shine upon you," that was about as great a thing as, and they thought, they believe, which there is power in that. And today, somebody says it, and it's just kind of like a greeting, or a lot of times they'll say benediction, which that means it's over when this is said, and they kind of see it as that way. Back then, that was not the case, and even if you remember, even when Jacob was blessed by Isaac, and and when he pretended to be Esau and all that, they had, Esau says, "Take it," but he said, "I can't take it back." It's got that kind of power in it. When it goes out, it's out. It cannot be reversed. It can't be changed. It can't be brought back. It can't be canceled out. So this was, old Jacob knew what he was doing too. The Joseph nut didn't fall far from the tree with that one. He sees Pharaoh, basically at this point in time, the most powerful man in the world, in the Western world or known world in that area. And the first thing he does is blesses him. Somebody that probably didn't need to be blessed. I mean, he's got everything and there's nothing else he could have, but that's about as good a way to start it off as anything, rather than saying, "My name is Jacob, I'm his dad, I'm good to meet you," or whatever. And so
Mark of respect.
it was a mark of respect. And it's almost like "Long live the king" when they would go in, or "Hail to the chief" when the president comes walking in, all those kind of things. So what's Pharaoh's first question to him? How old are you? When I read that stuff, I think he must have really looked old. If Pharaoh's first question looking at him says, "Oh, how old are you anyway?" But he was a shepherd most of his life. He was out in the sun all the time. They didn't have sunblock.
Yeah, but 130 years is still old.
Yeah. His wrinkles might have hung all the way down to his belly. I don't know, but he does look old. And Pharaoh says, "How old are you?" And what's his answer?
It's been difficult.
Yeah. 130.
Hasn't been a good 130.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. There's 2 or 3 things in here that's really interesting about what he says, and it kind of shows you his attitude of life. The first thing is, what's he call his life? Pilgrimage. Or actually it can be translated as my sojourn, my traveling, my pilgrimage. People kind of see that as 2 things. One of them is that he traveled about all of his life. He started off in Israel. He goes up into Mesopotamia, which is northwestern Iraq. And he was there. Then he comes back. He's traveling all around the Holy Land for a while before God basically says, "Stay here." Now he's on his way down to Egypt at the end of his life. So his life has always been kind of traveling. He's never really had, quote, a home. And, that was one of the things that was even in the promised land, was that, that was to be inherited by the descendants. And so, he's not really a citizen like we would think of any country, any group of people. The only ones within his clan are the people, the 70 that are there. He doesn't come from a larger group. He didn't come from one of the cities. Everywhere he's gone, he's been a stranger, and or been what we would today call a resident alien. Somebody that wasn't born here, isn't a citizen, but lives here and plans to live here for however. And so the other idea of the pilgrimage is that, and this is one that is adopted by a lot of Jews, but more Christians even than Jews, is that life is a journey. From the time we begin to we end, and they see that journey as one of 2 things, and not so much in the way we think of as travel, but it can be a faith journey. And how we're moving with God and through God. And it is a pilgrimage as we move towards that next life. That we know, we're not permanent here. We are, a resident alien within the world. Our permanent home is going to be with God and in the New Jerusalem and all that. So there's some that feel like he's talking about that. Life is my pilgrimage on this earth. My traveling on this earth has been until I go to be with the family, to be buried with the fathers and join Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and Rebekah and all the rest. So 130. But what's he say about that 130? He says two things. First one's really interesting to me.
They don't equal the years of struggle.
Few and difficult. Few. He's 130, and he says my years are few. So why do you think he would say few? It kind of tells us there.
Busy.
It's actually in comparison to the pilgrimage of my fathers. So remember how old his fathers were? Let's see. Israel was 175, Abraham and then Isaac was like 180, if I remember right. And he's going to get really close to that by the time he dies. But so he's saying, I'm expecting to die about any time, and I think my life here is about over. Now my dad and my grandpa, they lived a whole lot longer than I did. So and he says that they've been difficult. Had they been difficult? His life's been his name Israel means struggles with God. His life's been a struggle all his life. How did it start? Struggling in the womb. His mother, Rebekah, even asked God, what is going on? And he says, you have two babies that are fighting because they're going to fight when they're out. Or it actually says they're in contention with one another. And so even in the womb, he was struggling. Then Jacob got everything that he could have asked for. He got the blessing of the firstborn. He got the birthright of the firstborn. He got the blessing, for the Holy Land and the people being as many as the stars in the sky, the sand on the sea, and all that sort of thing. But what price did he pay for that? His brother wanted to kill him. He had to go and live in another place for 20 years. He wanted Rachel. He got Leah. Then he got Rachel. And the two of them didn't get along. So imagine that. So that didn't go real well for him. He finally got the wife that he wanted and all that. And she didn't have any kids for a long time. Has one. And as she's having another one, she dies. And so the wife that he always wanted, he had. She ends up dying in childbirth, giving him the children that he wanted. So he's come back now as his family's on the verge of starving and all that. He's lost his favorite son, Joseph. He thought was torn up by animals, and because remember they dipped his robe in blood and brought back his coat and all shredded up and all that. So he's a prime example of somebody that got everything they wanted, but they paid the price for it. And his life was a struggle. And then, he gets to see the angel of God, and what did that cost him? He's limping for the rest of his life. His hip joint was put out of joint and stayed that way. So, which is one of the reasons they wouldn't need to send a cart for him, because he wouldn't have been able to walk. So when he said, now the few is one thing, but when he says difficult, they were different, especially compared to like Isaac or even Abraham. And, everything he got, he had to fight for, struggle for. Because even if you remember with Laban, his father-in-law, they had the agreement about what sheep and goats would be his. And he says, you changed the agreement on me 7 times or 10 times in 7 years. So even that was a struggle trying to get enough he had to leave, afraid for his life. And if God hadn't intervened, he probably would have died. And so when he says difficult, he's right. So he doesn't go into it a whole lot, just been a hard life, and so that's and it's kind of goes along when we went through the book of Ruth with Naomi. So she said it's been a hard life. Don't Naomi means pleasant. She said, don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me bitter, Mara. But she never complains about God. She just states that for some reason these things have happened, and that's what he doesn't complain about it. He just says they've been difficult. So how's he end up, or what's he do before he leaves? He blesses Pharaoh again, and so then what does Joseph do?
Gives them the best property of the land.
Yep. Settles his brothers and his father in Egypt, gave them property. So they weren't just sojourners anymore. This is the first time that the only other property that the patriarchs have owned up to this time has been what? The tombs. The tombs at Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, everybody's buried there except for Rachel. And why was Rachel not buried there? She died, too far away to get there, and outside of Bethlehem. And so he gives them property in the best part of the land. And what district is it?
Ramses.
District of Ramses. Now, there's a lot of people that will bring, this was written a whole lot longer, because they don't call Ramses not even been born yet. He's about 350 years away. There was Ramses the first, Ramses the second, which is kind of thought the one that Moses contended with. So, the whole idea is, now this says, and so people argue the, what's that word, historicity or whatever of the historical accuracy, basically, of all of it. But who wrote this down? The story been told this is 450 years before it was written down. Who wrote it down? What do they call it? The books of Moses. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, including Genesis and Exodus. So Moses is the one putting it to pen. Who's he writing to? People that came from where? The area of Ramses. So how did the Jewish people get to Ramses? Well, because Joseph settled them in Goshen, which late 400 years is known as the area of Ramses. So Moses is writing this for the people that come out of the area of Ramses. He wants them to understand this is the same place. It doesn't change the historical accuracy or when it was written, or even how it was said. Now, because he doesn't say that Pharaoh called it that, he doesn't say that Joseph called it that, he says it is the district of Ramses. And it's about the same way that prior to 1816, whatever, if somebody would have referred to the area we are in, what would they have called this area? People that lived prior to that would have called this the Northwest Territory. What do we call it today? Indiana. And it makes it we understand it a whole lot better if somebody says, well, there were these battles for the Revolutionary War that were fought in the Northwest Territory. We'd be saying, well, that's interesting. But if you said they were fought in Indiana, then all of a sudden we understand where that's at. And that's what Moses was doing for these people. They may not even knew that it was called the area of Goshen at that time, because for them it was the area of Ramses. So Moses is throwing that little editorial comment in there as these people would read this and learn this, that they would understand where is he talking about. So now, so he gives them their own private property. We're going to find out here in the rest of the chapter that's a big deal. Now, what else does he give them?
Food.
But how does he give them the food?
According to the dependents in the household.
Yeah, he rations it out to them. Now, at first we say, well, why would you ration it? Because it says, with food according to the number of their children. Why would he ration it out? Because there's not enough food to go around. And he's not giving them extra. He's got a whole nation to take care of. He's giving them the food they need. And what that means, we look at it as that's all he gave them. What they're meaning to say, what they're actually saying is he gave them enough. You know, it wasn't that he limited them, it's that he, you know, he made sure all the children were fed, is what they're saying. So that puts a little different turn on it, doesn't it? And that's what they're actually saying when it says, according to the number of their children, he made sure the children were fed. And that's a pretty significant thing. So, you know, there are people today still trying to make sure the children are fed. Verse 13, we're going to change, we're kind of, the rest of the chapter, we're going to change from the Joseph and his brothers back to Joseph had a job to do type thing. And we're going back to Joseph's job that he did. There was no food, however, in the whole region because the famine was severe. Both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine. Joseph collected all the money that was to be found in Egypt and Canaan in payment for the grain they were buying, and he brought it to Pharaoh's palace. When the money of the people of Egypt and Canaan was gone, all Egypt came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is used up." "Then bring your livestock," said Joseph, "and I will sell you food in exchange for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, their sheep, their goats, their cattle, their donkeys. And he brought them through that year with food in exchange for all their livestock. When that year was over, they came to him the following year and said, "We cannot hide from our Lord the fact that since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there is nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may not live and not die, and the land may not become desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude. Or you can also translate that he moved all the people into towns, from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh and had food enough from the allotment that Pharaoh gave them. That is why they did not sell their land. So Joseph said to the people, "Now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you so you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields and food for yourselves and your household and children. You have saved our lives," they said. "May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord, and we will be in bondage to Pharaoh." So Joseph established it as a law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priest that did not become Pharaoh's. So Joseph, the first thing he does is he sells grain, and he's selling it to whom? He's selling it to the people of Canaan and the people of Egypt. Now I'll get the map up here. I don't know if you can see it. Get it up here a little bit closer. See, that says Israel right there. So Israel butted up. And what did they call Israel back then? Canaan. So Canaan, Israel butted up to Egypt. A lot of this other would have been considered Canaan too. The area of Jordan and all of that. So anyway, all the people that were on that border came to Joseph because the famine was in Egypt and Canaan, or the Holy Land, and it wasted away. So what did he do the first year or so? He sold the grain. And actually, you know, his brothers would have been a part of that for the first 2 years, buying the grain. Joseph tells them 2 years are down, there's 5 to go, you need to get down here. So for the first couple of years, he collected payments for the grain that they were buying. And so then what happens? They ran out of money. And it wasn't just that the people in Egypt ran out of money. Who all ran out of money?
Everybody.
The other countries too that were to the north and east of them. So they come to Joseph and say, "We're going to die. We don't have any more money. We've bought all the grain we can buy." So what's he say?
Bring your livestock.
Bring in your livestock. I'll swap you grain for your animals. So they brought it. He gave them food in exchange for horses, sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys. And they got them through that year. That was probably year 3. So that gets them through. And how are they seeing Joseph?
He's great.
He's a hero. So now, what happens the next year?
They don't have anything except themselves.
They don't have anything except themselves and their property. So they're saying, what's the point in dying? What good? It's kind of, what good is my land if all it's going to be used for is to bury me in it? I can't, if I'm not alive to stand on it, what good is it to me? I would rather be alive standing somewhere than be buried in it someplace else. Basically what they're saying. We can't hide it from you. In other words, our money's gone. Our animals are gone. We don't have anything left. And why should we perish? We and our land as well. Because the other thing is there won't be anybody to plant the crop. Sooner or later, the famine's going to be over. The drought is going to be gone, and rains are going to come, and the crops are going to flourish again. But there won't be anybody to plant it. So they need people around. So what's their offer?
We'll sell ourselves.
Yep. And buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we'll be in bondage to Pharaoh. So they're not just saying we'll be servants.
Slaves.
They're going to be slaves there. And this is one of the few times that you read in history that people offered themselves to be slaves. Now, there are some times, and even in like medieval Europe and things, there were what we call the feudal systems, in which you had one person in charge. The lord lived in a castle. He owned everything, and people were serfs. They had to answer to him, all those sort of things. But that's the way that they grew up. Those things were taken by force and done by force. This is one in which they voluntarily said, make us slaves. We will be in bondage to you. And it ends up saying, so that we may live and not die, and the land may not become desolate. Because sooner or later, the food's going to run out. There's going to have to be people to do that. So Joseph bought all the land. The Egyptians, how many of them? Verse 20. One and all sold their fields and became, and now here the Torah doesn't look on this real kindly, actually. And Joseph reduced the people to servitude. And now that's the way it's translated in a lot of the English things. It can also say that, now the other side of it though, it's one of those things that kind of be taken 2 different ways, is that he moved them to cities, which kind of makes more sense. It's obvious that Joseph wasn't out to generally make them slaves, but in all this, you wonder why Pharaoh liked Joseph? Pharaoh owns all the property except what property?
Priest.
The priest, the Egyptian priest. And everything else, Pharaoh owns all the property. He owns what else? All the livestock, and what else? All the people. So Pharaoh owns it all except for the priest. And Pharaoh basically owns that because what?
He supports them.
He supports them. The only reason that they haven't had to buy food is because Pharaoh's given it to them. So they're pretty well, and they're more in what you'd call servitude instead of bondage. And they're doing their thing under service. They're free to move. They can do what they want to do. They've got their own private property but they're being paid to have it, and all that sort of thing. Now, when you look at it though, that he moved them all to cities, does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, it does. If you're responsible for feeding all of them, and from just the flat out logistics, if you remember, Joseph built storehouses where?
The city.
In all the cities. It's where the food is. It's where the people are. They can't, no sense of them being out in the middle of nowhere. And actually you can look at it in one way in which Joseph was looking out for the people. You're living out in the country somewhere, and whatever kind of house or shack or tent that they lived in, you may die there because you can't get to where there is food. There may not be any water. Remember, how much is green? How much is brown? If you're not where the green is, there's no water there. Well, that's what this one is, this little thing. That's where the wells are around. That's where the oases are, where these things all are. That's not very many. And so it does look like it's more benevolent than mean that Joseph moves them into the town so that it's easier to take care of them, easier to feed them. Nobody's transporting food and all that. And so now Pharaoh has it all. So we're going to go to 23. Well, we read 23 too. So one of the things Joseph does now is, they think he's great because he saved their lives, saved the lives of their kids, all that sort of thing. But he says, now, here's the deal. You can still work here when the time comes. Now, this is not Joseph isn't saying go out there and plant it in the middle of the famine. But the time's going to come, because remember what their fear was? That the land would be desolate. When this is over, there won't be anybody to plant. And Joseph says, when there's time to plant, I got a deal for you. And what is it?
1/5 to Pharaoh.
Yep. Pharaoh's going to provide all the seed to begin with. And then when you harvest it, 20%. Doesn't sound too far off the taxes we pay today, does it? 20% goes to the government. And 80% goes for you. And that's also what it's for two things. What are the two things?
For feeding your
children.
For planting and for eating. So you got to watch. Make sure that 80%, which, up until modern times, the farmers had to watch all that anyway. What they got in from the garden, what they were able, people that were before grocery stores and all that sort of thing. There were a lot of times that families struggled till the next round of food came in the spring, until the next crops, whether it be berries in the field, plants or fruit on the trees, or crops that come out of the ground. There was a lot of times people were near starving by the time that it come up. So you've always got to judge, keep enough back to plant, because it doesn't do much good if you have enough to eat this year and you don't have enough to plant for next year. It's kind of you have to watch for that. And so what's their answer to Joseph when he says 20% to the government, 80% for you?
You saved our lives.
Yep.
And they'll be servants of Pharaoh.
Thank you. You are great, Joseph. You have saved our lives. May we find favor. May we do good, and we're going to do that for Pharaoh, so we'll be on good favor of him and all that. And we will be slaves in Egypt. So 26. So Joseph established it as a law concerning the land in Egypt, still enforced to this day, that a fifth of produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priest that did not become Pharaoh's. Now, the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in numbers. So, now, is that still to this day? No. Some people read that. That term is in the Bible quite a bit. And it continues still to this day. That was the day they wrote it. So, but what Moses says, remember how many years later did Moses write it down? 450. And so 450 years later, when the slaves left Egypt, the 20% was still in effect in Egypt. And we kind of know from history that, and from the Bible, that it was a different dynasty. They call it a different family. There was a change, whether it was I don't remember if it was a coup or if it was a civil war or what it was, but there was a change in the family that ran the country. And that's the way Exodus starts, that there was a new batch of pharaohs that didn't know Joseph. But they kept the 20% law going. They knew about that, and they kept that going. So when Moses wrote this down, it's just kind of like mentioning Ramses. He's saying all these people would have known about the 20% rule. And Moses is saying, our guy did that. You know, in order to save the people, our guy did that. And and they end up where? Goshen, and they acquired what there? Property. So now remember, now what's just happened?
Sold themselves.
Everybody else sold their property, except the priest. So there's three groups. There's the Egyptians that now own no property. There's the priests that are provided for by Pharaoh. And there's Joseph's family that owns property. Nobody else owns property except Joseph's family. That's what I said a little bit ago. That's huge, that he gave them property there. And, so they have property, and what else?
Possessions.
Fruitful and increased greatly in number. Now, this may sound kind of weird, but one of the things when you're living in that kind of situation, and it's the same for animals as it is for people. What is the number one determining factor for population? Food. Where there's famine, two things happen: children die, but a lot of children are never born. Population drops significantly, and it's the same thing with animals. You have a year there's a lot of acorns and a lot of stuff like that. The next year you're going to have a lot of squirrels. You're going to have a lot of deer. If there's a drought, like in 2012, I saw some stuff right after that there were a lot of population of animals drop because they suffered in it too. So it's not just people, it's animals. But now so everybody else in a famine, the 7 years of famine, their numbers would have been going down. The Jewish people, their numbers are going up because what? They got the best of the land, they own property, and which means they can also what? They can keep what they grow. They're not, and all that sort of thing. And they're not under, at this point, now, this is getting ready to get to the end of Genesis, the change to Exodus. Right now, who's free and who's slaves?
The Jews are free.
The Jews are free, the Egyptians are slaves. Kind of changes here in a couple chapters, doesn't it? Or between the two books, we go from the Egyptians slaves, the Jews free, to the Egyptians free, the Jews slaves. And that's a big difference. And it's one of the points here that they're wanting you to understand, that, as long as Joseph was around and people that knew Joseph, as it says in Exodus, things were going pretty good. So, real quick, Jacob lived in Egypt 17. Oh, by the way, they went from 70 to about 2 million in 450 years. So they were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." "I will do as you say," he said. "Swear to me," he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff, which you can also say as he knelt on his bed. So there's a couple interesting things about this real quick, and I know we're right at the edge of the time, but how long did he live after he met Joseph?
17 years.
17 years. How long did he live? How long was the time that he spent with Joseph before Joseph disappeared?
17 years.
17 years. Think there's a little significance there? And it's kind of Joseph's life envelopes Jacob's 17 in the front, 17 in the back. And that is not to be missed. So he calls Joseph in and says, "Son, if I mean anything to you," that's what he means. He said, "If I found favor in your eyes, if I mean anything to you." And anytime as a child you hear that, you know it's something that's going to be pretty involved. So what's he have him do?
Take you out.
Stick his hand under his thigh. Now, that's not the first time we've read about that. You remember the first time? Abraham and a wife for Isaac. When he said, Eliezer off to get her, put your hand under my thigh and promise me you will get, and off he goes. That was about as severe, or not severe. You couldn't have made a more solemn oath than that. And put your hand under my thigh and promise you'll show me kindness and faithfulness. Well, I'm sure Joseph is thinking, well, I've been showing you kindness and faithfulness, and I brought you down here and all that. But what's he say? Don't bury me in Egypt. And I know people today that go through that. Don't bury me here. Take me to wherever. And actually, honestly, my dad and I had that same conversation. Do not let them take me back to Indiana and bury me there. I want to be in Tennessee. So that was, luckily I didn't have to struggle with it too much. That was pretty well the consensus anyway. But those things happen. The same kind of, I didn't have to put my hand under his thigh. But now you got to stop and think about something real quick though. How long do you think did we say it takes to get from Canaan to Egypt? Weeks. Who's going to carry a dead body for weeks? They're not. What I think, this is my opinion, is that he knew about the embalming. He knew about how all that worked. He knew that Joseph had the ability to do that. And so he knows what can happen. And actually, when we get into chapter 50, he dies. Joseph has him mummified. And it takes like 30 days or something, and then they finally take him and bury him there. So he's aware. I think at this point, it wasn't just a matter that Joseph did it. I think he's aware that can be done. He didn't see it. And that's one of those things today that I think when people bring up about, being embalmed and being all that stuff, here's one of the patriarchs, the one that's called Israel. And he said, do that to me. And the Bible speaks highly of it because it got him back to the Holy Land. And so he said, get me out of Egypt and bury me back where all the rest of the family is buried. And he said, I will. And he said, swear to me you will. He said, I will. And then he prays, he worships, however you want to, whether you consider it leaning on his staff or kneeling on his bed. And so what's he worshiping about? To me, it's thank you, God, that there's a means to get me back to Egypt. Now I can rest. He can really rest. He's seen Joseph. He knows he's going to go back to the family tomb, be buried with his fathers, with the patriarchs and matriarchs, including Leah, and so I've had that full and complete life. Everything's done, and so he worships or praises or whatever there. So next time we will pick up on chapter 48, and with Manasseh and Ephraim. Let's see how it goes. So hope you got something out of it, and we'll catch you next time, Wednesday night for the fellowship chat at 7, or next Sunday morning at 10, or here on Sunday night at 6. So go out, be blessed, and be a blessing.